It just might be too late to start an Airbnb business. In 2024, after Airbnb's new summer release and Brian Chesky's statements about guests not having to wash cereal bowls and this general anti-Airbnb stance on the internet, and the fact that there's just so many hosts, is it just a bad time to Airbnb? What's the truth? As a host with over 150 properties, doing this 7.5, 8 years, I can tell you a lot's changed. And there's been some times where this has been really, really bad, like right after COVID, but then it was really good after COVID, which nobody saw coming, and then it got bad again. I've made over $10 million on Airbnb, and right now, I am not happy with Airbnb at all. But whether or not it's a bad time to do Airbnb as a business model depends on multiple factors. Like, are there areas that you can profit in? Like when you set up a property, will it make money? All things aside, that's probably one of the most important things. What it takes to make that money though, is it worth it? Because there might be business models out there that make money more easily, and even if both can be profitable, you should probably pick the most certain or most profitable one. And what's the risk of things going sour, having a business and then it turning into salt in your hands, and then you lose all your money anyway? The getting was good for like 3 months. Let's talk regulations, competition, startup costs, complexity, like learning curve. These are the things that you need to consider if you want to do something, Airbnb included, or anything else at all. And if I'm just a complete shadow, I apologize. I'm in Positano and I wanted to flex the view, but I didn't bring the camera gear to light myself. So I'm gonna look like a silhouette maybe at best. Thanks for your patience on that. Regulations first. This is the hardest one for me to give you an answer on because you could be in London, Australia, Chicago, Portland, Canada, you could be anywhere. There has been a trend over the last 5 years of cities regulating all across the world, not just the USA. And those regulations have fallen on the stricter side. Not always an altogether ban. Cities like New York get a lot of press because it's New York, but other places tend to get less so. Right now, Dallas is going through a fight, and it's going to go through what we call appellate court in the United States, which is a court level above the typical court for this type of process for voting on regulations. This happened because one side wanted to ban Airbnb altogether. And that actually passed, but the enforcement date was set farther into the future. And then the opposing party, people on the side of hosts, have set what's called an injunction to try to kick that down the road. I believe I'm summarizing that correctly. Anybody who studied law, feel free to correct me in the comments, thanks. But now it's in appellate court in July to vote on this again at a higher level court. A lot of people believe that Dallas won't actually go through with enforcement on what they voted in. This isn't uncommon. One of my friends named Theron, who does a lot of STR advocacy in the United States, he was able to fight and help reverse the ban in Detroit. They banned it and then they unbanned it. Dallas is looking at something similar. Philadelphia voted on a really bad regulation, but there's still a lot of people hosting. Cities like Portland, Los Angeles, all over California for that matter, have varied strict regulations, but still have plenty of people hosting. This is because you can either get permits to host or the cities are terrible at enforcement and people have found out, so people are hosting anyway. What is important to be said for you here, and I'm not going to advocate for hosting against regulations, even though everyone else is doing it. Like, you can research your own cities and see how that's going, but there are multiple factors at play. How strict the regulations are going to be. Do cities intend on enforcing those regulations, or did they just pass them to make hotels happy? Think Las Vegas, for example. They have all these hotels and they want to keep Airbnb hosts from operating because hotel casinos like the mafia run the city. So they pay all this money to lobby to get regulations in play. But then the cities don't want to pay money to enforce them. They just did what the lobbyists said because they got paid. Now, the lobbyists don't have any power to enforce the policies that they lobbied for. They only had the power to push the policies. So sometimes cities just push policy and then they never enforce it because of things like lobbyists. Third, do they even have the means to enforce if they wanted to? Like Austin has like a team of 3 people that handles all their permitting and enforcement, very small. And 4, what do those enforcements look like? Miami-Dade County, for example, would levy a fine against you, but had no means to collect the fine. They couldn't put a lien on your property. They couldn't put it on your credit report. It's not an arrestable offense, not even a bench warrant, nothing. So the city just has this all bark, no bite approach to their policies. Now, this could always change. Miami could make a change in policy and suddenly start arresting people or putting liens on houses. Other cities put liens on properties. This happens. And all of that to say, my opinion from looking at hundreds of cities' regulations with my thousands of students, I like regulations to a large degree. When regulations are set and it's somewhere in the middle where you can get a permit or you can get permission to operate 1 or 2 properties of your own, there's still opportunity to grow a business. For example, places like Seattle or San Diego have limited the number of properties that you personally can have. But what's cool about this is you can set up one property or two, make good money but do a good job, and then you can make a little presentation and go to other homeowners and pitch them to let you run their allotment of one or two properties. So this is called a co-hosting model. You can still have a portfolio of 40 homes where technically 2 are yours, and then other homeowners have their own, but they rely on you for success. This happens. Other cities, like for example, Dallas, if this goes through, or Philadelphia, the way it's zoned, you can do short-term rentals in apartments in commercially zoned areas. Not a big issue. Houses, not so much. So if apartments are cool and houses are bad, then rental arbitrage, my favorite way to do this, becomes the best way to scale and grow, because if you have 30 apartments and you have your own housekeeping teams, you could be really efficient on all the costs to operate something like this, and you can crush. So city to city, how you adapt to these regulations would change, but there are still business models at play. For example, now do you want to do arbitrage? Do you want to do co-hosting? Maybe, maybe not. And this is just regulations on whether or not it's even possible to run an Airbnb business reasonably. And finally, the reason why I'm mostly for regulations to some degree is that when regulations get set, they tend to not change. They don't get any harder. So when I made mention of a business model that dries up on you, turns to salt in your hands, and goes bad overnight, when you have a city that has regulations, this tends not to be the case. And a city that has regulations tends to have less competition, meaning it should be easier to be profitable when there's less hosts because of supply and demand. Let's look at Amazon FBA, for example. With Amazon FBA, you research a product that you're going to sell online, and that product could make money for a period of time. People have an interest in it. Let's say there's this new bubble bath toy that an influencer started pushing, and there's a surge of sales. You see this trend and you go to jump on this trend, and you start to allot like inventory to sell it on Amazon and become one of the many providers of this product. You set everything up, you pre-order 5,000 units of this thing, but then you realize all too late that that trend was based on one singular video, and you get a spike of sales that you missed, and then the sales drop. And you're one of 50 suppliers holding onto this stupid bubble bath widget, and you'll never be able to sell that inventory unless somebody else does another video and it gets popular. But now there's so many other suppliers with the same inventory because they did what you did. You're still likely not going to sell that inventory. You can get got by accident because you're at the whim of influencers in this Amazon FBA space. But let's also say that you had your own original product that you found. Let's say that you came up with this really cool bubble bath widget and you're the only person selling it. And because it's novel enough and you're the only person selling it, it sells and you've got good margin. But then other people doing their Amazon FBA research find this product being sold by you and they decide to get into the space. They start to compete with you. The only way you could prevent that is if you had an agreement with a manufacturer that they would never sell to anybody else, and fat chance you're gonna get somebody from China to have this loyalty agreement to you when they could also sell thousands of units to other people. They're not gonna protect you like that. So therefore, you are screwed and people can get into your space. The barrier to entry with Amazon FBA is really low, and anybody can do research. Kind of like how I teach Airbnb research, anybody can do research to find out what's working. But then, the cost to get in to sell your product is really low, so now everybody's gonna sell your product. If you do research on Airbnb to find a product that's working, you still have to find a property and then put that property on the market. If you can do successful research to find a good property and then pick up a property and start operating, you do have more barrier to competition than Amazon FBA, for example. And the primary reason for this point is that the market doesn't change. Customers like what customers like when it comes to accommodations. It's more of a core preference. Families like what families like when they're traveling with their kids, and an influencer isn't gonna change that. Not for long anyway. So you don't have to worry about your research being dependent on a fad by accident and then it disappearing in your hands. But this brings me to one of the more sour points about Airbnb, where it may not actually be worth it anymore. I have friends that I have coached to pick up properties. Not students in my Cracking Super Roast program, just my friends. And I've done this probably too much, to be honest. But Paul and Megan have a house called Queen's Landing. Beautiful property. They moved into that property and they stopped hosting on Airbnb. They gave up. Combination of two things. That property used to make $21,000, $22,000 a month, and it was in Oak Cliff, west side of town. They did a lot of renovations to the property. The backyard looks beautiful, great home, and it started crushing. I think they were making net income $12,000 to $14,000 net income per month. maybe even more at times. But then the squeeze happened, the Airbnb bust. A lot of people joined the space because the getting was good. People like Megan making $16,000 a month, they wanted in on the action. A lot of hosts jumped in, a lot of people bought properties, made them Airbnbs. So now their net profit was probably more like $4,000 to $7,000 a month, instead of 10 plus every single month. That one detail alone was enough to get them to side-eye this industry. Like, is this gonna end? Is this going bad? Anytime you do something and you start to make less money, you start to think that it's not as worth it, because the same work shouldn't make you less money. Nobody would ever take a job and then take a pay decrease. Not logically, right? So they're already thinking, well, maybe we're on the way out of this. Maybe this is gonna end. But then Airbnb adds these regulations to ban Airbnbs in residentially zoned neighborhoods. From there, Paul and Megan are like, well, there you go. We're making less money. We're not happy about that. And it's gonna get banned anyway. Let's just move into the property. Let's think about selling it instead. Now, they've made a ton of money on appreciation on that home. That's great. And if Dallas ends up not banning it, they probably could sell it as a previously top performing Airbnb property and maybe flip out of it for a lot of money, which could be cool. Or they may get back into hosting. But they quit, and they quit for their justifiable reasons. They were making less money. Now, the question for you though is, if you had a property where you bought it or you rented it and your holding costs were $7,000 a month, but you were making $11,000 to $14,000 a month, and so your net profit was $4,000 to $6,000 a month, would you be happy with that? A lot of people would. Paul and Megan, maybe not. They've got higher standards, but there's a lot of people that would. It has been said that people make money in recessions. People make a lot of money, or money changes hands in recessions. And this could be one of the primary reasons. People who are used to making money when something is soft may not want to make money when something is hard. But people who've been looking for their come up and find this opportunity to make $3,000 or $4,000 net income per month in the same industry that somebody was making $15,000 per month, because they've never made that $4,000 per month that way, they're happy to take it. So a company that's used to making money in a more lean way, lower margin, and succeeds at lower margin, will then succeed when it gets softer. But the reverse doesn't often happen. People who are used to making money in a soft industry when the margins are juicy tend to give up when it gets more lean. It's the psychology of loss. People feel lost twice as much as they feel a gain. They say that in stocks and trading. And I can tell you, I've lost millions trading stocks, and yeah, it hurts. It hurts a lot. Now, I've had properties that have done good. I've had properties that have done bad. I've had properties lose money. I've set up 30, 40 properties at a time where the design style was all just not good enough. They were just so bland and plain. And doing 40 properties in the same building where everything was just ugly, those don't make money. I, at one point in time on my journey as an Airbnb host, lost more than 6 figures per month after launching a total of 80 properties in 3 cities where all of them were ugly. We had to completely overhaul our inventory, cut some of those properties, redesign some of those properties, change the bed count in some of those, so that way we could stop losing money and get back to what was working. But it was one of the most educational moments of my career as an Airbnb host. It really signified a change for me, where before, in 2015 through 2019, you could put anything on Airbnb and it would make money. Even post-COVID, with this post-COVID travel revenge boom, you could probably have anything on Airbnb, and for a while it made money. Everybody just wanted out of the house. But as Airbnb matured, as the competitors got better, as people started to care more about design and amenities and providing good service, not just having product, there started to be a separation between what could be considered more hotel room-like Airbnbs and everything else that was more experiential. And so today, my newest listings have grand pianos, have cathedral geodes, have wild paint colors, and all this stuff. And those properties are making good money. Like this orange property that I have. The rent cost me $4,000 a month, which is high for me. I normally don't want to spend this much money on rent for a place. I got the landlord to give me 8 weeks of rent for free on the front end, and I made my money back within 90 days of this investment, and this property makes more than $10,000 per month. So this property will make me $3,000 to $5,000 per month through peak season and slow season is my projection, but it's consistently making me right now about $4,000 a month net profit. Very cool. 3 years ago, I would have never touched this property. It was too expensive. I wouldn't have done it. And I never thought I'd be here where the philosophy to succeed was to risk more money. I just didn't think the industry was gonna be like that. I come from a world of newspapers where all they did was cut and downsize, become more lean, become more lean. Yeah, that's where the gray in my beard came from, was surviving the newspaper industry. So going to an industry where people have to have more pizzazz, be more fresh, be more dramatic, be more creative, I just didn't think I'd be in an industry like this, ever. But the most important thing I can tell you is if you're going to be an Airbnb host, that you have to have the magic. You can have a property and it will either make money or it will lose money based on the decisions that you make when that property is brand new. What couch you buy will define the space. The color palette that you choose will create the mood and the vibe. How diverse your color palette is room to room will create a sense of depth and character to the place. What amenities that you choose, how you describe your property, the settings that you use, how aggressive you are on price, everything from the gate will determine how Airbnb will initially rank that property, because just like we've learned with the Instagram algorithm or the YouTube algorithm, anytime you want to use the word algorithm, just use the word audience instead. And Airbnb is no different. What the audience chooses tells the algorithm what to do. And so if people are picking your listing, clicking on it, looking at it, wish listing it, saving it, sharing it with friends, booking it, then Airbnb will go, wow, this is an interesting listing. And Airbnb still to this day calls their algorithm an interest algorithm. That's important to know. Even though they've blended in some other stuff, they don't talk about this, but we're seeing now that they're using satisfaction metrics in their algorithm too, which means guests on the front end, audience on the front end says, oh, this is an interesting listing, we like it. But audience on the back end is giving feedback going, it was worth it or not. Does that make sense? So it's important, if you're going to Airbnb, to pick a property that has good bones, that you can make into something magical. And then you do have to execute a hospitality product. You have to provide a service. You have to deliver and crush, so that way guests on the back end say, hey, this was totally worth it. This was good. Airbnb more than ever is leaning on the superhost function, I think. And I can't quite confirm that yet. I'm still doing my research. Stay tuned for a very near future video on that. But Airbnb for one period of time abandoned Superhost, and I think they're bringing it back. If this video was valuable to you in your consideration to what it takes to be an Airbnb host and whether or not the business model is worth it, please let me know down in the comments. If you have any other questions about the industry, let me know too. I'm obviously a host, so I'm biased. I know that I've succeeded for 8 years and I know that I'll continue to, and I have students that are succeeding, so of course I know that they're successful. And I would try to tell you, yeah, start an Airbnb business and use my videos to do so. I would want to tell you that. But I also want to tell you that this industry is actually real work. You will have to learn to run a business. You will have to be willing to provide a service. You'll have to shut up and let a guest complain from time to time. You're going to have to be able to be creative in your design style. And that can be overwhelming to some people. You might need to tag in a professional for that. You're going to have to be willing to crunch numbers, do a little analysis, track your prices, and change your prices. It's not a set it and forget it thing. It's not a passive investment. It is something that can get dialed in, and I teach a lot of people to do that, and you can eventually create automations for your prices that make your pricing strategy 99% automated, yes, in time, but this industry requires you to be a few things: creative on the front end, analytical while you run the business, and hardworking. But for that reason, at the same time, everything balances out. If an industry requires these things to be successful, people who are not capable of those things won't be successful, which means if you are those three things or willing to be those three things, you can run a successful business and everyone else will fail. I'm telling you, there are people failing Airbnb and will continue to fail Airbnb for these reasons. So if you think you can perform and you want to feel safe in an industry like you have good barriers to entry, performance required, then maybe an Airbnb business is good for you. Because unlike Amazon FBA, not everybody will come in and eat up all your profits like little piranhas. You won't have to trend chase and constantly conduct analysis and then try to determine if the data you found is just fads or if it's going to be a long-standing thing, and if you can find a way to prevent competitors from eating your lunch. An Airbnb business is a real business. And people on the internet might want to tell you that it's some magic investment money thing, and that's a lie. If you want to learn how to run a real business, you're in the right place. I survived the newspaper industry, made millions of dollars in that dying industry. I can squeeze water from a rock. I did it there. And in the phase that we are in with Airbnb, like almost any other industry, if you're going to be successful, someone else will have to lose. You have to be cool with that. Keep watching this YouTube channel for the best free business education on Airbnb, bar none, from a gentleman with over 15 years of business experience and over 4 seven-figure businesses. I promise I won't steer you wrong if this is the path you choose. Thank you so much for watching this video, and as always, my friends, I will see you on the other side.